You can rebuild a home with wood and nails, but rebuilding peace, that takes something much deeper. Months passed after the cabin was finished. The news stories faded. The town moved on, and I thought I had too. Until one autumn afternoon, I got a letter. It came in a plain white envelope with no return address. The handwriting was shaky, like someone had written it with trembling hands. Inside was a short note that read, "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to say I'm sorry. Margaret." I stared at that name for a long time. Margaret, the same woman who had destroyed my family's legacy. The same person who made me feel small, powerless, and broken. And now she wanted forgiveness? I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted to tear the letter up. Another part, the part that still remembered my father's voice, told me to listen. Dad used to say, "Son, anger is heavy. Don't carry it too long or it'll crush you." And maybe he was right. So I decided to see her. A few days later, I drove to the small assisted living home in town. That's where she was staying after her trial. She'd lost everything: her home, her position, her savings. Her name had become a story people whispered about, not with fear anymore, but pity. When I walked into her room, she looked up slowly. She was thinner now, her hair gray and her eyes tired. But when she saw me, her lips trembled. "I didn't think you'd come," she said quietly. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to say. Then I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. The silence between us felt like a lifetime. Finally, she spoke. "I was wrong," she said, her voice breaking. "I wanted control. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood, but really, I just didn't want to be forgotten." That line hit me like a wave, because suddenly I didn't see the cruel HOA leader anymore. I saw a lonely old woman who'd spent her life trying to matter, and chose the wrong way to do it. She wiped her eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she whispered. "But I wanted you to know that I kept one thing from your cabin. It's in that drawer." I opened the drawer beside her bed, and there it was, a small, worn-out picture frame. Inside was a faded photo of my parents, standing in front of the old cabin, smiling. "I was going to return it," she said softly. "I just didn't know how. For a long moment I couldn't speak." Tears filled my eyes. Not out of anger, but out of something heavier, sadder, and strangely peaceful. I held the photo close and said, "You took so much from me, but I'm not going to spend the rest of my life hating you." She looked shocked. "Why?" she asked. "Because hate doesn't rebuild anything," I said. "It just burns what's left." Her eyes welled up. She whispered, "You're a better person than I ever was." I stood up, placed the picture on her nightstand, and said quietly, "No, Margaret. I'm just someone who's finally free." And then I left. That night, I went back to the cabin. The air was cool and clear, and the stars were bright above the treetops. I sat on the porch, holding that old photo in my hands. The cabin glowed warm behind me, the fire inside dancing across the windows. It was more than just a house now. It was proof that even when life falls apart, you can rise again. I looked up at the mountains and whispered, "Dad, I did it." But I didn't win because she lost. I won because I let go. The wind blew softly, and the old wind chime sang again. That same gentle song it used to play when I was a kid. And for the first time, I truly felt at peace. In the weeks that followed, the community built a small memorial near the cabin, a wooden bench carved with these words, "Home is not where you live. It's where your heart refuses to give up." Every time someone new comes to visit, I tell them the story, not as a tale of revenge, but as a reminder of resilience. Because no matter what people take from you, they can never steal your strength, your hope, or your faith. So if you're listening to this right now, maybe you've lost something too. Maybe someone tried to take what was yours, your peace, your home, your trust. Don't give up. Don't let the bitterness win. Stand for what's right, fight with truth, and when the storm is over, rebuild with love. Because in the end, justice might give you your house back. But forgiveness will give you your home back. You never really understand peace until you've lived without it. After months of anger, loss, and fighting, I finally woke up one morning without a knot in my chest. For the first time in what felt like forever, the world seemed quiet, not empty, just calm. I drove up to the old cabin site that morning. The road was rough and dusty, but it felt different now, like it was leading me home again. When I parked and stepped out, the air smelled of pine and rain-soaked soil. The mountains looked the same, standing proud and eternal, like they'd been watching this story unfold the whole time. The land was bare, just an open patch of earth with a few pieces of broken stone and wood still lying around. But to me it wasn't empty, it was sacred ground. Every inch of it held memories of laughter, love, and the life we once had. I closed my eyes and could still see my father sitting on the porch, cleaning his old fishing rod. I could still hear my mother humming while she baked her pies. For a moment I felt like a little boy again, safe, small, and loved. But then I opened my eyes and saw the truth. The cabin was gone. And if I wanted it back, I had to rebuild it with my own hands. That same week, I met with a local contractor named Tom Harris. He was in his 70s, tall, kind, and the type of man who still believed in handshakes and honesty. When I told him the story, he just shook his head slowly. "Son," he said, "people like that woman think they can rewrite history. But they can't erase what's in your heart." Tom offered to help me rebuild the cabin. Not for profit, but as a favor. He said, "I grew up in this valley, too. I know what family land means." I couldn't find the words to thank him, so I just nodded. The next morning, we got to work. We cleared debris, hauled out broken planks, and leveled the ground. It was hard work, the kind that leaves your back sore and your hands blistered. But it also healed something deep inside me. Every nail I hammered, every board I lifted felt like taking back a piece of my life. Neighbors started showing up, too. First it was Mr. Jenkins with his old truck, bringing a box of tools. Then came the Martins with lunch and cold lemonade. Even the kids from down the road came to help paint signs and carry boards. Before long, it wasn't just a rebuild, it was a reunion. People who hadn't spoken to each other in years were laughing again. Stories were told. Old wounds were healed. One afternoon, I caught myself smiling, really smiling, for the first time since the whole nightmare began. And I thought maybe that's the beauty of losing something. Sometimes, when life tears everything apart, it gives you the chance to build something even stronger. A few weeks later, the news about the HOA scandal spread nationwide. The story aired on TV, a headline that read, "Federal Marshals return family land after HOA fraud." I never imagined my father's little cabin would make the evening news. Reporters came by to ask questions. They wanted to know what justice felt like. I told them, justice isn't about revenge. It's about peace. You don't win when someone else loses. You win when what's right finally comes home. People wrote letters, too. Elderly couples from other states sent cards saying they'd faced similar things. One man from Oregon wrote, "Your story gave me hope to fight back. Thank you for standing tall." I read every message, sometimes with tears rolling down my cheeks. I never knew my pain could give others strength. By midsummer, the new cabin was halfway done. It looked almost identical to the old one, except stronger. A new frame, a wider porch, and windows that caught the light just right. I kept one piece of the old chimney stone and set it right at the center of the new fireplace. That stone, cracked but solid, reminded me of our family. Tested, but not broken. One evening, when the work crew left, I sat alone on the porch steps. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky gold and red. The wind rustled the pines, and for a moment, everything was still. Then I heard the soft clinking of the wind chime. It wasn't there before. Someone had hung a small wind chime on the porch beam. It was shaped like a tiny cabin with the words engraved on it. Home again. I don't know who left it, but I felt my chest tighten and my eyes blur. Maybe it was a neighbor, maybe it was Tom, or maybe it was a sign from above. A reminder that home isn't what you lose. It's what you rebuild. Weeks turned into months, and the cabin stood tall again. Every plank told a story. Every nail held a memory. On the day we finished, the whole neighborhood came together for a small gathering. Someone brought pie, someone played the guitar, and we all stood under the stars, watching the smoke rise gently from the chimney. I looked up at the sky and whispered, "This is for you, Dad, and I swear..." I could almost feel him smiling. As the fire crackled that night, I realized something powerful. It wasn't just about my family anymore. It was about everyone who's ever been taken advantage of. Everyone who's been silenced, ignored, or cheated by people who think power makes them untouchable. But power fades. Truth doesn't. Margaret's name had become a warning now. The HOA was gone, the town was free, and for the first time in years, people started taking pride in their homes again. Gardens bloomed. Porches were fixed. Neighbors waved instead of arguing. Sometimes pain brings people together in ways peace never could. Before I went to bed that night, I wrote a note and pinned it to the cabin wall. It said, "This place stood for family." It fell because of greed, but it rose again because of love. That's when I knew the story wasn't just mine. It belonged to everyone who believes that good still wins in the end. You never forget the sound of justice arriving. That morning, the gravel road that led to the cabin shook beneath the tires of 3 black SUVs. The air felt heavy, like the mountains themselves were holding their breath. And when those vehicles stopped, the doors opened slowly, one by one, and out stepped the federal marshals. They weren't there for show. They weren't there to negotiate. They were there to make things right. I remember standing there beside the empty land where our cabin once stood. The morning sun hit the side of my face, and for a moment it felt like my father was standing beside me. I could almost hear him whisper, "Keep calm, son." Truth doesn't hide forever. The lead marshal walked up to me. He was tall, calm, and carried that kind of quiet strength that comes from years of dealing with liars and cheats. He said, "Mr. Thompson, we're here on behalf of the Federal Housing Authority. We've reviewed your case. We believe your property was unlawfully seized." Those words hit me harder than I expected. Unlawfully seized. It was official now. It wasn't just my story anymore. It was truth in the eyes of the law. The marshal continued, "We'll be visiting the HOA office today. You're welcome to come, but please stay calm. Let us handle it. Stay calm." That was easier said than done. For months, I'd been carrying a storm inside me. Anger, grief, helplessness. But I nodded. I wanted to see this through. We drove down together, me following behind the marshal's convoy. The HOA office sat in the center of the community, a polished building with white walls, perfect lawns, and flags flying in front. Everything looked clean on the outside, but I knew what was hiding beneath. Margaret, the Karen who stole my family's history, was standing outside when we arrived. She had that fake smile plastered on her face, the one that said, "I'm in charge here." But the moment she saw the federal badges, her smile started to shake. "Good morning," the lead marshal said, showing his ID. "Federal investigation. We need access to your property records immediately." Margaret blinked, clearly trying to collect herself. "Property records?" she said, forcing a laugh. "I'm afraid there must be some misunderstanding." The marshal didn't blink. "No misunderstanding, ma'am. We're here regarding the Thompson family cabin, the one removed without consent." For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. She looked at me, then at the officers. Her lips tightened. "Well," she said, "the cabin was unsafe. We followed community procedures." The marshal stepped forward, voice firm but calm. "Community procedures don't overrule federal property law. And from what we've reviewed, this wasn't a community issue, it was theft. That word, theft, hung in the air like thunder. People started gathering outside. Neighbors whispered. Phones came out. The queen of the HOA was finally cornered. Margaret's assistant, a nervous-looking man in glasses, came rushing with a stack of files. The marshal flipped through them carefully. He stopped at one document, lifted it, and looked straight at her. "Ma'am," he said, "this transfer of ownership, who signed this?" Margaret swallowed hard. It was approved by the board," she said quickly. The marshal raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Because this signature doesn't match any verified owner record. In fact, our forensic review already confirmed it's a forgery," the crowd gasped. I could feel my heart pounding. Months of pain, anger, and disbelief were finally catching up to her. The marshal continued. "According to federal law, forging property documents is a serious offense. Do you understand that, ma'am?" Margaret tried to speak, but her words stumbled. I only wanted what was best for the community," she said weakly. "No," the marshal said, voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You wanted control, silence. The kind of silence that makes even the wind stop moving." Then the marshal turned toward me. "Mr. Thompson, we've confirmed your ownership. Your cabin was demolished unlawfully. You have full rights to rebuild. The HOA is under investigation effective immediately." I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. My throat tightened, my eyes burned. All I could manage to say was, "Thank you." "Thank you so much." Margaret stood frozen, hands shaking. When the marshals told her she'd be questioned downtown, her voice cracked. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she cried. But it was too late. Justice had already arrived. As they led her away, one of the marshals turned to me and said, "Sir, if it's any comfort, your cabin meant something. You fought for what was right. People like you remind us why we do this job." That simple sentence hit me deep. For months I'd felt invisible, like my fight didn't matter. But hearing those words, it felt like my father's hand on my shoulder again. The next few days were a blur of meetings, papers, and interviews. The federal agents discovered that Margaret had used HOA funds for personal gain, vacations, designer furniture, and consulting fees. She'd also illegally seized 3 other properties, all belonging to elderly residents who couldn't fight back. The news spread fast. Local channels picked up the story, calling it the HOA scandal that rocked the valley. Neighbors came by to thank me. Some apologized for not speaking up sooner. One old man, Mr. Jenkins, said, "Son, you didn't just get your cabin back. You gave all of us our voices back." That meant more to me than anything, because this was never just about wood and stone. It was about honor, about family, about standing up when life tries to knock you down. A week later, the marshals called again. They said the land was officially restored to my name and that the HOA was being dissolved pending a full audit. It was over. After months of pain and sleepless nights, it was finally over. But when I drove back to the lot where the cabin used to stand, I didn't feel angry anymore. The dirt still smelled like pine. The same mountain still stood tall behind it. The same birds still sang. I knelt down, ran my fingers through the soil, and whispered, "Dad, we did it." A soft breeze brushed my face. I don't know if it was just the wind or something more, but it felt like his answer. Then I made myself a promise. I would rebuild, not just the cabin, but everything it stood for: peace, family, and love. You know, sometimes life takes away the one thing you thought was safe forever. That's what happened to me. Our family cabin wasn't just wood, nails, and windows. It was the heart of my childhood, the place where my father taught me how to fish, where my mother baked blueberry pies that smelled like heaven, and where every summer night ended with laughter echoing against the mountains. That cabin was our family's soul, but then one day it was gone. Not burned down, not sold, not lost. It was stolen. Yes, you heard that right. Stolen. Not by thieves with masks or robbers in the night, but by something worse. By a Karen who ran the local HOA like she owned the whole valley. Her name was Margaret, but everyone in the neighborhood called her Karen with a clipboard. She was one of those people who always had a rule for everything and a complaint for everyone. Too much noise? She'd call. Too many cars in the driveway? She'd fine you. Too long grass? You'd get a notice. She was the queen of control, and she loved every bit of it. Now our cabin had stood there for decades, long before the HOA was even formed. It was built by my grandfather's hands back in the 1950s. Every stone, every board had a story. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest. It was built with love, not greed. When my father passed away, that cabin became my sanctuary. I'd go there to feel close to him. The smell of pine wood, the creak of the floorboards, the sound of wind brushing through the trees. It was like his voice whispering, "You're home, son." But that peace didn't last long. One spring morning, I drove up the dirt road to the cabin. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and I was humming an old tune Dad used to love. Then I turned the last corner and froze. Where our cabin once stood, now there was nothing. Just a flat patch of dirt. No porch, no roof, no fireplace, no home. For a few seconds, I thought I was in the wrong place. But then, right at the edge of the lot, I saw a bright orange sign. It read, "Property seized for HOA compliance violations." My heart stopped. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My knees went weak. My father's cabin, our family's legacy, had been taken. At first, I thought it had to be some mistake. We never signed up for that HOA. We weren't even in their district. The land had been ours for over 70 years, but when I called the HOA office, guess who answered? Margaret. "Oh," she said, in that voice that made your skin crawl. "You mean that old unsafe structure? It was a liability to the community. We had it removed for safety reasons." Removed? Removed? It took me a few seconds to even breathe. I asked her what she meant. She said the HOA assumed control of the property because of unpaid community fees. Community fees? We never even received a single bill. I felt anger burning in my chest, but also disbelief. You don't just remove someone's home without warning. I told her I'd be contacting my lawyer. She laughed. And that laugh, I'll never forget it. It was the sound of someone who thought she was untouchable. When I got off that call, I sat on the hood of my car and looked at the empty lot where our cabin once stood. I could still picture it. The rocking chair on the porch, the chipped blue door, the little wind chime that played soft music every time the breeze came down from the hills. Now there was only silence. For days I couldn't eat or sleep. My mother's photo hung on the wall of that cabin. My father's fishing rod leaned in the corner, and now it was all gone, hauled away like trash. I drove to the county office to file a report. That's when the real nightmare began. The records had been altered. Somehow the HOA had filed a transfer of ownership under an emergency clause, signed not by me but by a forged signature. Margaret had claimed the cabin fell under HOA jurisdiction and that the land was abandoned. Abandoned. Imagine that. A place I visited every month, cared for, maintained, and loved, called abandoned. The county clerk looked at me with sympathy. He said, "Sir, I'm sorry. This looks like fraud. But you'll need federal help for this." That's when I knew this was bigger than a neighborhood dispute. This was theft on paper, backed by corruption. I spent weeks calling lawyers, filing reports, and collecting old documents, tax receipts, property deeds, and letters from my grandfather. Each piece of paper felt like a piece of my heart. But I wasn't going to let that Karen get away with it. I found out she'd been doing this to others, too. She had a habit of targeting elderly landowners, claiming their properties violated HOA rules, and then quietly transferring them to her control. It was a pattern, and she thought no one would notice. Well, she was wrong, because this time she picked the wrong family. I filed a case with the Federal Housing Authority. It took months, but one day I got the call I'd been praying for. The agent said, "We're sending federal marshals. Be ready." My hands shook as I hung up the phone. For the first time in months, I felt hope, real hope.